Welcome friends to another 40k video. Today we examine the Butchers Nails and answer a few questions about them. What's it like to get them implanted? Could the Emperor have removed them? What key discovery helped the nails be duplicated? And why did Angron not rid himself of them? Let's start with what they are. Friends, let's find out. They are a type of brain surgery. The device of the nails is placed into the brain cavity, and there it amplifies the anger and rage in you, so that it overrides every other emotion. You become subsumed within the red fury. Now, broad spoilers from this point on from the various Angron books that touch upon the Butcher's Nails. In the first quote, we'll be covering the work of Galen Serlac. He's working on the nails, trying to get them ready for the sons of Angron, and his orders are to fulfill his father's mandate, to forge a functioning, stable replica of Angron's Butcher's Nails, dead world eaters freshly delivered from the debacle on Genna occupied steel slabs around him, their skulls sawn open to expose the grey matter of their brains. Galen had seen to them personally, removing their progenoid glands to be implanted within fresh recruits and caring for their bodies with all the reverence expected of a brother. In death, his fallen kin would continue to serve the Legion. On them, fulcrum of the 12th Legion's future would turn. Vel Carader moved between teams of janitors, augmentists, and neurologists, his long stalk legs clicking against the deck. The Magos held the reins for the Mechanicum's contributions to producing prototypes of the neural implants, where Serlac's focus was on guiding the symbiosis built between their technology and the 12th Legion's flesh. On the last of the slabs, dissected to the point where its component parts covered the entirety of the surface, was the corpse of the Genan simulacrum that Khan had brought before Angron. It was a Xenos the World Eaters had faced. All they'd met, they realized afterwards in fighting, was a simulation of real life, bodies created that had no individual personalities, but were altogether controlled by an elite higher body. On Galen's orders, several more of the humanoid proxies had been collected from the surface to be dissected, and studied alongside it. There was a key discovery for the Butcher's Nails in them, and we'll go more into that now. Serlac later talks to Magos, the World Eater. When Khan first brought before me this, Galen gestured to the Genin, I believed it to be purely mechanical, so like any other piece of salvaged technology, we sought to study its function. Under controlled conditions, of course. We ran an electrical current through it, trying to restore power to the selective areas. And once we did, we discovered that we had interrupted something, a signal, partly psionic in nature, partly mundane. These things are machines, that is true, but the world that guides them is not. We have discovered through our study of the signal it was broadcasting as well as their anatomy, that the Genans are not merely autonomous machines masquerading as humanity. This entity, its thoughts, its movements, all will be controlled remotely by a human mind. It is possible that a single mind can control hundreds, even thousands, if the command is not complicated. A command such as standing in a crowd between us and their cities, said Mago. Precisely, Galen nodded with a smile. The entire population, true population, could no more be around a few thousand souls, and yet they control millions. It is truly extraordinary. For our efforts to create a working reproduction of the nails, it is revolutionary. A chill shot through Mago at the words. Explain. The largest obstacle we face is not creating the machinery of the implants, said Galen. Such technology is little different to that utilized in the creation of any other graft or augmentation. Where we stumbled, and where the lack of templates for this archaeotech was felt most acutely, was in the manner in which the implants interface with the living brain. There only existed such standard template constructs for devices such as these, but they have been lost to us since old night. Most, it is feared, forever. Seized by some small epiphany, I compared the data we had gathered from the Genin and Angron, and found that, in more than one sense, they overlap. We believe that the technology employed by the Genins is based on the same STC lineage as the Primarch's enhancement, and as such, by utilizing their design, we can finally create the nails in a fashion that allows for a stable, survivable outcome and subsequently mass implantation across the Legion. Galen also confirms the implants can't be removed without killing Angron. And now we join Khan as he gets them fitted in a grisly surgery. What is it actually like for someone to undergo that procedure? Preliminary procedures for the implantation remained the same as with every iteration that had come before. Khan's scalp was shaved completely and the skin daubed with counterseptics and sanitizer gels that scoured away the top layer of skin to render it sterile. Medical servitors played the red beams of their false eyes over Khan, measuring the exact points where the nails would be inserted and marked them with the barely perceptible scars of precision laser etching. The mechanical slaves climbed out of the pit, shuffling aside as Khan's brothers began their part in the procedure. Bone saws and drills whirred as the apothecaries and the tech marines cut the opening through skin, flesh, and skull, withdrawing neatly exercised discs of blood-slick bone and dropping them into the steel trays arrayed around the surgical pit. The bulk of this newest iteration of the implants was comprised of a pair of fluted metal spikes, slightly shorter than the length of a legionary hand. Each was open at the rear, crested with a plume of snaking wires as fine as human hair. Apart from the wires, the butcher's nails looked every bit their epitaph. It was fitting, then, that they would be driven in with a hammer. The first blow rang with the contact of metal upon metal, with the soft sigh of the spike sinking into the meat. The hammering that followed was far more delicate than the first, short, measured thuds that pushed the nails fully into Khan's brain. Rows of connecting ports were cut and sutured into place across the back of Khan's head. As a main of silver segmented cabling was threaded into his skull, the cables were joined with the wiring jutting from the nails, fashioning what looked like a crest of metallic dreadlocks running across the rear half of Khan's skull, their appearance almost identical to that of Angron's own implants. At first, Khan thought it was the twinned beats of his heart's dormant second, roused to action by the trauma of having his skull drilled open and his brain altered. But it was not. It was something too quick to be the drums in his chest, yet still stinging from within his blood, an insistent pulse ratcheting sharper and sharper with every passing moment. Tick, tick, tick. Khan's head began to tilt, the muscles of his face twitching in bouts of involuntary spasm. His manacled hands clenched and unclenched into fists, snapping his chains taut in jolts of clashing links. Tick, tick, tick. The apothecary was staring down at him, face impassive behind his white helm. He pulled the mask free, the face beneath creased in concerned curiosity, staring at Khan like an insect planning to be pinned for study, like a nothing like. Tick, 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 tick. Khan, came his muffled voice, barely audible over the pounding white, hot needles in his brain. Khan could not tear his eyes from the vein in the apothecary's temple, pulsing with the blood beating out from his heart. Khan, tick, can tick you, tick, tick. Hear me? Khan's nerves were burning. His blood was turning to poison. He felt control ebb from his limbs, but they were not going no more slack. New strength was coursing into them, filling them to bursting, the veins rising to bulge across his musculature like swollen tributaries. The restraint broke in a string of snapping metal links. Khan heard the rushing voices around him as they backed away, sounding so thin, so weak, spurring his rage even higher as he tore the collar loose and surged up out of the pit to face them. A cry ripped out from Khan's throat, a bestial noise beyond what even a transhuman should be able to reach, as he snaps back to his senses, and those around him, those who performed surgery on him, have been slaughtered. The surgery has, under his new strength, become an abattoir. In this next excerpt, we'll be looking at why he got the nails. Do you know what these things do to you? Do you know what they really do to your men? Lorga had asked him. Angron had nodded. He knew better than anyone. They let me dream, he admitted. It was one of the few moments in his life he'd never risked admitting such a thing. He still wasn't sure why he'd said it. They make it difficult to feel anything except from the most fierce righteousness. A headache thudded behind his eyes, coiling all the way down his spine. He wasn't in the right frame of mind to have such a talk, but Horus had sent them into Ultima Segmentum to work together. At this stage, so early in their journey, the cracks of tension had yet to show. Lorga had smiled sadly and shaken his head. Your butcher's nails were not made for a Primax mind, brother. They steal the healing hours of sleep from you, not letting your brain process the day's events. They also cauterize your emotions, feeding everything back into your basest urges. To kill, to fight, to slay. That is all that gives you pleasure, isn't it? These implants, crude as they are, have remapped the cartography of your mind. You don't understand. Perhaps they do all those things, but they also brought a maddening peace that had to be chased, and the purity of absolute fury. They're not simply a curse, though they may seem that way to you. Then enlighten me, help me understand. You want to remove them. I know you do. He died before he allowed that. For all the pain, for all the twitches, ticks, spasms, and aches right to his bloody bones, the butcher's nails brought clarity and purpose. He'd never sacrifice that. He was not weak enough to feel the temptation. Brother Lorgar sounded disheartened then, his eyes cooled by concern. They cannot be removed, not without killing you. I had no intention of trying. If it is possible for us to die, you will do so with those wretched things still inside your skull. You know we can die. Ferris is dead. Lorgar looked away as if staring through the metal chamber. I keep forgetting that events are proceeding so very quickly, are they not? If you say so. So why would you inflict this upon your legion? Answer me that, at least. Why would you order your tech marine to hammer these butcher's nails into the heads of every warrior in your service? Angron hadn't replied at once. He owed Lorgar no answer, but a thought took slow bloom in his mind. The idea that if any of his kindred could understand, it might be Lorgar. After all, this Primarch had inflicted punishments of his own upon his favoured sons. Even now, the word-bearers in the Gal Vorbach were severed beings, existing with demons trapped in their hearts. It is all I know, he admitted at last, and it has never failed me. This is how I win my wars, Lorgar. You've done similar things to win yours. That is true. From there, the memory grew hazy and indistinct. The degeneration followed over the course of weeks as the two legions suffered the rise of their master's tension. 40,000 warriors in Word-bearer Crimson and 70,000 in World Eater White filled the decks and hold of a vast flotilla. So, another question we asked is, can the Emperor remove them? Now we'll go over to a talk between a techno-archaeologist, Archenland, who has been summoned by the Emperor to a secret lab within an active volcano, very James Bond, to offer his insight on a piece of archaeotech. The techno-archaeologist moved from the shadows beyond the harsh glare of downward light aimed at the body. He found he couldn't look away from the patient's face and the crude, vicious cybernetics implanted upon the unconscious monster's skull. Teeth of the cog, he swore softly. The Emperor seemed too distracted to note his blasphemy. Minute circuitry on the fingertips of the omniscience blood-stained surgical gloves pressed to the giant's chest. They generated an aura of ultrasound wherever they touched, and this giant, by the way, is the body of Angron. Crude internal scans of the spine and surrounding flesh drew themselves upon several of the nearby monitors at various angles. The slumbering body gave a heavy twitch, and a grunt as pain spiked through its nervous system. Arken moved across to see the giant's pained features, the metal teeth, the furrowed brow, the scars upon scars, the cables tendriling out from his scalp like cybernetic dreadlocks. Angron? He breathed the name. Yes, the Emperor confirmed, inhumanly toneless. I'm trying to undo the damage that has been done to the 12th. The Emperor gestured a free hand, similarly smeared with blood, to 3 screens that still projected a flickering hololithic of the giant's skull, brain, and spinal column. The image was riven with dozens of slender black tendrils that were anything but organic. Arkan stared at these scanned images in the slow dawning understanding in his mind. His comprehension of human anatomy was absolute, given his experience and education, but the images on the screen weren't entirely human, nor were they in accordance with the sacred and approved paths to augmetic ascension. This was rather more profane, which means it's going to be from the archaeotech, the dark age of technology, if the archaeotechnologist sees things like that. It is my belief that you have seen this device before, said the Emperor. Is that so? Yes, Divine One. In my expedition down to Exarchian vaults that were sealed by your own decree, ratified by Fabricator General Kelbarhal, and all findings within unrecorded. Yes, Divine One, the law within represented a moral threat and a potential perversion of cognition. The Emperor's fingers pressed to the unconscious Primarch's temple. Would you saw a device like this? Archenland nodded. The profane text entombed within the Hexarchian vault named it a cruciumen. The Emperor continued his fingertip scans, saying nothing. I've never seen one implanted and operational, Arkan confessed, and never of this specific pattern and intensity. In the repose of stasis or storage, the device in the sealed vault were rather more crude than this construct. That is to be expected. Why, in your infinite wisdom, would you implant this device inside a Primarch? I did not do so, Arkan. With great shame, I confess I am not certain what I am looking at, Divine One. The 12th and its Legion call them the Butchers Nails. The Emperor kept staring at the screens. You are looking at modifications to my original template of the 12th. More precisely, you were looking at modifications of primitive genius. Before these examinations, I had believed the enhancements performed upon the 12th on Nuceria were the source of its emotional instability. My hypothesis was that they stirred the 12th to a sense of perpetual but ultimately artificial rage, yet the opposite is true. With the alterations made to the limbic load and insular cortex, the surgeons had impaired the 12th's ability to regulate any emotion at all. Furthermore, they have rethreaded its capacity to take pleasure in anything but the sensation of anger. They're the only chemicals and electrical signals that flow freely through and from its brain. All else is either dulled to nothingness or rewired to inspire a degree of agony. It is a testament to the durability of my Primarch project that the 12th has managed to survive this long. His own emotions causing pain? No, Arkan, everything causes it pain. Thinking, feeling, breathing. The only respite it has is in the rewired neurological pleasure it receives from the chemicals of anger and aggression. And note he refers to his son here as it. That's vile, said the techno-archaeologist. Perversion of cognition rather than purification. The Emperor showed nothing but passionless interest. Such rewriting of physiology certainly hinders the 12th's higher brain functions. The device is cunningly wrought for something so crude. Can you remove it? Of course, the Emperor answered, still looking at the screens. Arkan did his best to hide his surprise. Then, Divine One, why would you leave it there? This is why. The Emperor rested both hands on Angron's head, one with the fingertips pressed to the Primarch's temple and cheek, the other pressed to the crown of his shaven head, where the cable tendrils joined to flesh and bone. The images on several screens immediately resolved to a clearer imprint of a brutishly dense skull, miserable with crude cybernetics and the bone scarring of powerful surgical laser cuts. Do you see? The Emperor asked. Arkan saw. The tendrils were sunk deep, rooted in the meat of the brain, threaded to the nervous system, and down in roughly serpentine coils around the spinal column. Every movement must have been agony for the Primarch, feeding back into the base emotions of anger and spite. Worse, the brain's limbic load and insular cortex were more than just savaged by the pain engine's insertion. They had been surgically attacked and removed even before implantation. The device hammered into his skull hadn't ruined those sections of the brain, it had replaced them. Ugly black cybernetic showed on the internal scans in place of entire sections of the Primarch's brain tissue. They are the only thing keeping him alive, Arkan said. And that, friends, that's where we'll end today's video. So basically, the Emperor can't fix his Primarch because the Butcher's Nails are actually in his brain. Spoilers for Echoes of Eternity, when Sanguinius slays him in that book. He rips out the cabling of the Butcher's Nails, and that brings out part of his brother's brains as well. Of course, Angron returns because he's a demon at that point. So that, friends, on those insightful and pretty long quotes from the books. I hope you enjoyed getting into the surgical details there. It's a little awkward to read, but still pretty interesting. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll wrap things up there.